Hi, this is Chris Conroy, Executive Vice President of National Accounts with Insurance Agency Marketing Services, or IAMS, and I'm pleased to be hosting today's first webinar program of a five-part webinar series, Elevate Your Sales EQ, which I'm confident you'll find to be a highly engaging conversation, and it'll provide you with the tools and tips that you can incorporate into your practice immediately. IAMS has a deep-rooted commitment through its 34 years in business to delivering on one simple promise to our customers: to help you win by providing the tools, the advice that you can use to thrive. So we're committed to winning your trust through industry excellence and leadership. This webinar series will deliver on that promise, the promise that will help make you a better financial professional in your relationship with your clients. And that's why when we talked with some of our top advisors here, how we could up their sales game, especially with the challenges faced by COVID-19, we focused our attention on elevating your sales EQ, or emotional quotient, because we know it's one thing to have the highest IQ in the room, but it's something completely different to have the highest EQ. IQ doesn't close sales. Having a higher sales EQ matters more. Connecting with clients through empathy, understanding your own emotions, and communicating with clients in ways that make sense for them. That's why upping your emotional quotient is so important. Our first program in our Elevating Your Sales EQ series is the reasons for fixed indexed annuities in uncertain times. Before I introduce our featured presenter today, I'd like to take a minute to thank North American Company for Life and Health Insurance, whose generous sponsorship has helped make this webinar series possible. We're pleased to have North American Sales VP Tia Stanley on the program with us today, whose broad experience and skills in the annuity industry at both a leading distribution firm and with top carriers has made her a well-recognized sales leader. Tia is a recent award winner of the NAFA Next Gen Annuity Leadership Award. Tia, welcome.
Chris, thank you so much. Appreciate you and also the opportunity. Really, it's my pleasure to sponsor an event like this. And man, what a combo with both IAMS and Dr. Jack Marrion. So a couple things about North American that I wanted to mention. Number one, we're committed to the IMO space, and we're going to support IAMS by being competitive in that annuity arena. And, I just want to take our VersaChoice product as an example. We've got a great accumulation play. We've got first to market liquidity. We've got excellent indices to choose from, really providing the options and flexibility for your producers, and their clients to be able to take a look at both accumulation and, again, first to market liquidity. And another thing I want to give a shout out here when it comes to IAMS, Chris, I knew IAMS had been in the insurance industry for a very, very long time. My gosh, 34 years in the business. For those tuning in, when you're thinking of a partner, I'm sure it's very similar to how I think of an IMO partner here at North American. You're wanting the strength and the stability. Well, you've got that with IAMS. Take a look at how long they've been in the industry, how much they've seen, and how competitive they can be when it comes to thinking about their producers and exactly what they're needing at this time. So when it comes to the sales EQ, I think this is absolutely fantastic. And again, Chris, very appreciative of the opportunity. So I'll flip it back over to you.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the kind words there, Tia. Now I'm pleased to introduce our annuity think tank expert, Dr. Jack Marrion, as our featured webinar presenter today. Let me share a little background on his work. Many of you know him, but he's a top industry and academic book author. Publications such as Index Annuities, A Suitable Approach, Gen X, Gen Y, and Fixed Annuities. One of my favorite, Real World Index Annuity Returns, partnering with the Wharton School of Business, Professor David Babel. Research studies from the Advantage Compendium that he ran. He's been an expert witness for the NEIC and also in the 2016 DOL fiduciary rule combined litigation effort, which ultimately led to that rule's defeat in the Fifth Circuit. Past president of a broker-dealer, past officer of life insurance companies, past officer of an investment banking firm. He's also led academic research in how annuity clients think and what their internal biases are, with a doctorate from Webster University on behavioral biases, where he's been a research fellow. Last, Jack's won the NAFA Bo Johnson Lifetime Achievement Spirit Award, recognizing his many years of contribution to the fixed annuity industry. With that, Jack, welcome to today's program.
Thank you much.
Just running through today's program real quick, the format before we get going is going to be relatively straightforward. Jack will lead us through his presentation. I'll pose a few questions, observations along the way. I'll also be offering everyone on today's program opportunity to answer several polling questions to help make this interactive so you can see how other advisors are thinking about the same questions. Be on the lookout for those polling questions throughout the program. They'll pop up. Please answer them if you can, and then I'll share our collective responses along the way so you can see how others are thinking. If you have a specific question, you can ask that in the chat box, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible after the program. So with that, well, Jack, let's get into today's program and the topic of reasons for fixed index annuities in uncertain times. We're certainly in uncertain times. The economy uncertainty, COVID-19, stock market volatility, the 2020 presidential election. Wow, Jack, they're kicking things off. Are indexed annuities a product that advisors should be considering for their client nowadays?
Well, yes, they are, and that concludes my remarks. Thank you, Chris. I probably should go longer. I have a parable to talk about how fixed annuities fit in. If you canoe down a river and look at the shore, you can usually tell the river's floodplain. The trees will show how high the water's been, how far back it's gone. And in early days, when the country was being settled, settlers looking for a homestead would observe this and build their homesteads above the floodplain. They build there in a safe place. And other settlers coming down the river would notice this and build their homes in the same safe place out of the hazards of the flood. But what often happened is you'd have periods where the river would not flood for a number of years, or it would barely flood. And after a number of years of this new normal, some adventurous souls would build their homesteads in the floodplain. However, this only worked well until the floodplain reminded them that new normal is not normal. There's only long history, at which time the floodwaters would reach up and wash away everything the adventurous souls had built. And in a lot of ways, the stock market is like a floodplain, as you can see in the next slide. What this chart shows are years with corrections, going back over 50 years, the floodwaters, where the market lost anywhere from 10 to 50% of its value. If you look at the right-hand side for the last decade, we've had a pretty good period of little flooding. But the reality is, if you go back even over 50 years, there have been some really nasty floods, and we shouldn't forget this is happening. The issue is we get used to things, and we start to think that what is happening today is going to happen tomorrow. And that tends to make us overconfident and may make us cause to make bad predictions, as you can see here. There was a survey done in February. They asked consumers, is the stock market going to have a major downturn in 2020? And 18 out of 20 consumers said, no, there will be no major downturn in 2020. Now, that turned out to be wrong, but they could be forgiven perhaps because they're amateurs. However, 19 out of 20 of the professionals out there also said the market would not turn down. And yet, as the next slide shows, less than 30 days later, the average 401k plan was down 35%.
Yeah, Jack, I popped up our first question there. Appreciate everybody responding to that polling question just so we can get other advisors' opinion. Certainly, we have this illustrates the sequence of returns risk, I think. And certainly facing a bear market, the worst time, particularly with a lot of the advisors on this call, work with clients who are pre-retirement, retirement phase. I mean, would you say that's a big risk, Jack, sequence of returns?
Absolutely.
And, that's something, I know what you and I were talking about just yesterday, frankly, wasn't even part of the conversation maybe 20 years ago. Wait, what is sequence of returns risk? And, getting those big corrections at the worst time can really devastate one's retirement plan. Is that right, Jack?
Yes, they can.
So let's move on to the next slide here.
Well, we've had a great bull market. It ended. It did end, but it went on longer than any bull market in the history of the United States. It outdistanced the naive 90s. It was better than the go-go 60s. It beat the roaring 20s. This was a long and prolonged bull market and made people a lot of money. However, every time we've had a long bull market, it is often followed by a nasty and severe bear market.
Uh, Jack, talking further about bear market and bull market, what's your observation and client sentiments right now as we've seen major corrections just this year with COVID-19 changes?
What you've been seeing more of is a continuation of the belief that this is temporary. Many consumers still believe that the last 8 years are holding, that this is a temporary correction, and the market will zoom again back up. And it's been doing that for the last few months. So you've got the same mindset that people had for the last decade, which is the same mindset they had in the 90s and in the 60s and in the roaring 20s.
Gotcha. And as we work through these changes here, I know, Jack, we're going to talk a bit about volatility, and we've seen a lot of swings in the volatility index, the VIX, and I think over this, this year illustrates. I just look at the trailing 12 months. Certainly, the volatility there has been anywhere. The VIX index 11 to 85, and what does that mean today, do you feel, for clients and how they think about the retirement plans, and ultimately what's the best way to overcome that?
Well, the biggest issue with volatility is the way the word's been misappropriated by Wall Street. If you go back a dozen years ago, they didn't talk about volatility. Wall Street talked about losses. They tried not to. They don't like the L word, but they did talk about losses. That all changed. And about a dozen years ago, they started talking about not reducing losses or minimizing losses, but reducing volatility, minimizing volatility, getting rid of volatility. And what they were trying to do is use this as a euphemism for losses. And they were pretty successful. They got a lot of the financial press talking in the same language. The problem is volatility is one thing, losses are a completely different thing. There are two entirely different concepts. Volatility has no causality when it comes to losses. That does not cause losses. It is not losses. So when you talk about a volatile stock market, it makes people nervous and it can make people have bad decisions. But avoiding volatility does not necessarily mean you're going to not lose money. And then there's an entirely different argument on top of this. Not argument, excuse me, application. There's volatility control indices used in the index annuity space. Volatility control in the securities world is used to get rid of losses. Well, you don't have that problem with an index annuity. You're not going to lose money if the index goes down. So what a volatility control index does in the index world is it provides the potential for more gain.
Yeah, I think that's a funny. It's kind of a funny business. We're all in the financial services business, but it seems like the securities world speaks a little different language than the insurance world. And I know, thinking back to this very issue of investment risk, and I guess I always thought of that when through school, was the risk that you could actually lose your principal, as opposed to the potential to get more interest credits on top of the guaranteed rate. So I know we had the proposed SEC Rule 151A. That's, I don't know, 10 plus years ago. Jack, you were an expert in that effort as well, and ultimately that was unwound as different, as incorrect, and clarified with the Harkin Amendment to Dodd-Frank. But you have any thoughts about that? I mean, risk in the consumer's mind and how they should be thinking about it.
The key point on the volatility is the black shows volatility, the red shows losses. Yeah. Wall Street deals with losses because in the securities world, the risk is losing actual dollars. It's losing money you already have. It looks backwards. It's historical looking. With a fixed annuity, your risk is the opportunity cost that you might not make as much gain. So it's entirely different concepts. Security talks about actual dollar lost. So that's your cost, where your cost in a fixed annuity is not making as much more money as you might. So entirely different mindset. Because as we've both talked about, losses hurt.
Right. I think this chart illustrates, an important point and how clients, and I'll ask a polling question here for everyone. How many of your clients don't recognize when, they lose 20%, it's not just 20% to get back to zero, right, Jack? It's 25%.
Absolutely. In the last two bear markets we had a 50% loss, which means it took 100% to get back the gain. Now, there are some things you can do in a choppy market with losses, a long bear market.
So Jack, in the annual reset, the chart we're looking here, the 1990 to 99, what's the key point there? That was a raging market during that time period, right? Just also in the 2010 to 2019 period,
Sure. Sure.
that was a time when, we also saw a run up, but it was a little bit choppier market. How do you, if you're comparing both 90 to 99 and that 2010 to 19 period, what's the key point there on annual reset effect?
Well, the nice thing about the annual reset concept is it treats losses at zeros, and you start the new crediting period, the new calculation at the new lower mark. So in a choppy market, you get to take a benefit of that gain. Now, when the market is steadily rising, there isn't much of a benefit from using an annual reset approach. For example, in the 90s, the S&P 500 increased 345%. If you apply an annual reset approach, you're only up 352%. So it's not much of a gain. And if you look at the last decade, 2010 to 2019, the index was up 133%, but the annual reset approach was up 139%. Again, it's not much of a change. It's not a real big gain. Where the annual reset approach works is when you have a prolonged bear market and a choppy market. As the next slide really illustrates, if you look at the first decade of the century, the S&P 500 wound up down 16%, where an annual reset approach had you working off of 106%. Now, you didn't get all of that upside in most of the index annuities, but some upside beats the heck out of a loss. And this chart's kind of unique. For many years, I went to carriers and collected actual consumer data on index annuities. I went to the carriers and asked them for copies of customer statements with the customer information whited out to see what they did over the previous 5 years. I did that for many, many years. And these are the average of those returns. Now, you cannot say this is the average for the industry because even though I had several hundred data points, I didn't have all the data points. What you can say is this is the average of a large set of data. And what it shows is kind of what the previous chart showed, which is when you have a strong bull market, the index annuity does not compete as it shouldn't. But in a choppy market, it does a pretty good job.
This is looking at equity markets and how they compare. I mean, in your mind, is it better to think of a fixed indexed annuity as a comparison to a bond alternative or an equity upside or both?
The equity upside would be equity protection, but the bond alternative is definite. I've said before that you should really consider, instead of stocks and bonds, stocks and fixed index annuities. If you look at this long pattern here of the blue lines, which are the index annuities, in all but 2 of these years, they beat the average taxable bond fund return. So they've done a very good job. And for every scenario, they beat the average return of 5-year CDs. So they've done a good job of protecting principal from market risk and providing returns that are competitive with other vehicles that do the same thing. Now, the issue this slide shows is you have people today that maybe like the story, but they're waiting for one more big jump in the market. I'm going to buy that index annuity just as soon as I get one more big bump, one more big increase, more money in my pocket. They're trying to time the market. So what I did is I went back to the last bear market and looked at timing and said, okay, let's look at the S&P 500 with reinvested dividends, essentially an index fund, and compare that performance with a fixed index annuity with a steady 5% cap. And we're assuming you started with $100,000 and then you got out. Now this one, if you go back to the previous slide, please. This assumes you got out at the end of 2007. And what it shows is that was a smart thing to do because your 100,000 in the index annuity is worth 115,763 bucks, while the index fund equivalent is worth 108.5. So that was perfect timing. What if you screwed up and got out a year early? You got out in 2006. Well, you did pretty well. You've got 114,000 in the index annuity. You have a small loss in the fund. It's 99,000. What if you really screwed up and got out in 2005? You missed out on 2 great years. But again, the index annuity is worth almost $120,000. The index fund is worth 112. Now, this was one bear market. Didn't matter when you did it. It was a good time to buy the index annuity and get out of the market. Surely that couldn't happen again, but as the next slide shows, maybe it can. Because this is the previous bear market, and similar situation, start off with 100,000 bucks, you get out at the end of 1999. 5 years later, the index annuity is worth 110. The index fund is worth 89. Again, you screw up and get out a year early, you still get 110 in the index fund, excuse me, in the index annuity, the fund's worth 97. Or you really got this wrong and you got out in 97 and missed 2 great years. Didn't matter. You had $110,000 in the index annuity, and $97,000 is where you wound up 5 years later with the S&P 500 with reinvested dividends versus the index annuity in all these examples without reinvested dividends and a 5% cap. So the answer to the question, when is the right time to buy a fixed index annuity, is today.
Right, Jack. I'll pose a polling question for everybody here. We have a lot of, in our annuity marketing kit, over a dozen tools that illustrate this very point about the power of annual reset and some other tools. And with that, I would encourage people, if you want information about those tools, those are great point of sale, consumer friendly pieces. Take a look at it, and we'd encourage you to give us a call here and get those materials. So with that, Jack, I mean, it sounds like the point would be index annuities, at least in this kind of snapshot, win a lot of the time, maybe all the time in the periods that were picked here, but are an excellent product for a lot of consumers that are looking for solving their retirement plans. Is that right?
Absolutely. We just have to get that message across to them, which is kind of like, what questions are we facing? Well, this is those kind of things you run into. We talked about the bottom one. What about the next market upswing and missing out? Well, we kind of explained that one. Sometimes it didn't matter about your timing, and losses hurt. You can also tell them about annuities have been around. They're not something special that nobody buys. Over $500 billion has been placed in fixed index annuities over the last 20 years. $500 billion. And if they've never heard of fixed annuities, saying nobody buys them, I don't know anybody that buys them. Well, just last year, 1 million of their neighbors bought a fixed annuity. There's some other questions you get, as we mentioned on the next slide, that you should also can address pretty easily. Now, for the person that says, I can make more money in securities, go for it. Take the risk. That securities are a viable solution. You can make a lot of money in them if you understand the risk for that amount of money. But they are a place to be risk adverse. For the saver, it often comes down to the opportunity cost. You'll have somebody that's getting 1% in their CD, and there's a 4% cap upside potential on the index annuity, but you could also conceivably make 0 next year. And you might have a person really hitting on that 1% and really afraid of the 0. The way to approach that is by a comparison and just say, so what you're saying is to lock in that 1%, you want to give up the possibility of making 4%. And you do realize that if this is right only 1 year in 3, you'll still be doing just as well as you'll still be doing better than you would have done by keeping the CD. So there are a lot of good answers to the objections raised in annuities.
Another one that I think we hear a lot if you read the trade press and see a lot of advertisement out there is, aren't annuities expensive? Seems like there's a lot of fees. I've heard noise about a lot of fees, and what's your response to that one?
And the answer is they're talking about variable annuities. I've never heard an objection that was not talking about a variable annuity. You just say, those are variable annuities, these are fixed annuities, and move right on.
Right. And we just launched a poll question. We have our own proprietary, common client objections rebuttals. Great piece. We'd love to get to you. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check yes. And the other question I have there for you, Jack, is, talking about in the marketplace today, CDs may be paying 1%. If you shop around a little bit online or so forth. And multi-year guarantees are also attractive, and they might be part of the solution. Today we're talking about indexed annuities, but there are some 5-year MIGAs that pay high 2s, even 3%. How do you reconcile that? Is that still worth taking a look at in comparison to indexed annuities?
Oh yeah, I mean, MIGAs are a great solution, as are index annuities. And what you probably want to do is do a mix. That way you give the consumer the assurity that they're earning a certain rate of interest and a fixed index annuity. In fact, in the 3% example, 1/3 of the money placed in the MIGA and the rest placed in the index annuity would assure them they're still going to do as well as they would have done in the CD, even if the index annuity does flatline. So
Yeah, I think there's some great, this is just a little bit of tip the iceberg. You see Jack Marrion's white paper, which we'll get to you if you're interested. There's a lot more consumer objections and responses that can help you position the products as what they are. So encourage you to reach out to us and get that information. Let's move it on to then the next topic about did you say if you stayed in, what would you have got, Jack, over this time period we're looking at?
that's the whole thing. Buy and hold has been a long tenet of the stock market, and it's still viable. But if you look at the last 20 years, if you'd stayed in, the S&P 500 would have grown from $1,000 to $2,200, which it's doubled your money, but that's a 4% return, annualized return. And if you consider all the gut checks you were taking over this period with all the bear markets and the corrections, was it really worth all that heartache to get 4%? Maybe you want to consider something that takes away the heartache.
Yeah, and of course, the other part of this chart, just to update it to current, I think everybody knows is, you see here the correction from 01 to 02 is almost 40%, 07 to 08, almost 40%. There's a lot of consumers obviously concerned, their retirement plans are blown up, what's going to happen? Just looking at this year, March 20th, February 20th, when the S&P was an all-time high of 3386, and just 22 trading days later, on March 23rd, the S&P had dropped to 2237. That was a 34% correction in just 22 days. So financial advisors on the call, obviously you know that you got clients calling in. What's going to happen now? A lot of that, if they maybe had stuck in some of those positions, maybe that's come back, but it's that anxiety and fear, I think, that has wreaked havoc with many consumers, and this can happen again, and certainly could, go into the future.
And this one talks to the savers. Well, all I did was I went back 50 years, plugged in a annual reset design with a 4% cap, and saw how often it beat over a 5-year period a 2% return and a 1.5% return. And what you find is in every scenario, it beat a 1.5% return, and in over 85% of the scenarios, it beat a 2% return. Now, what's important about that is the average 5-year CD rate right now is 0.5%. So what that says is, worst case, the index annuities historically would have given you triple the return. The other point is the best 5-year CD I could find out there this morning was one paying 1.46%. The next best was 1.34. So the worst case index annuity still outperformed the best case 5-year CD in today's environment. And that's a strong statement. So who's a potential buyer of a fixed index annuity? You know who they are. There are people that are risk adverse. They want the potential for a little higher interest rate. These are some of the folks, the young people, the people close to retirement, the ones that want guarantees. It's not always an age thing. It's a risk thing. And that's what's important.
On this point here, I know you talk about, another point about FIAs is, seeing their bond fund values fall as general interest rates rose. So we haven't seen that, and a lot of noise that maybe inflation's on the horizon. Isn't there a risk? I think a lot of customers don't understand this, that there is bond interest rate risk. So take a 10-year bond, just a 1% increase in the interest rates would be a negative 8% value in that bond or bond fund. And then also, there is some bond credit risk, default risk, especially in the B category or high yield category of bonds. And so is that a consideration as people are comparing how bonds compare to fixed index annuities?
Absolutely. You've got the credit risk, which is even greater than it was. More investment grade bonds are slipping from triple B to double B, so there's more risk of actual loss. And the other problem is rising interest rates hurt the value of an existing bond. By contrast, with a fixed index annuity, the index annuity has a better pricing environment if interest rates go up, even an issued index annuity. So rising interest rates help a fixed index annuity, but hurt a bond and bond fund.
Great point today, as obviously a lot of consumers are allocated to bonds and bond funds for a lot of logical reasons. We've seen, the continued slide of bond interest rates, since the 80s. And so we're at a time where it's hard to imagine they could go lower. I suppose we could be Germany and have negative rates, but I think a lot of people would prognosticate that the rates are probably going to, in 10, 15 years at some point, are going to be higher. And with that, their bond funds and bonds are going to be worth less. So moving on, I guess, to as we closing up here, the rational marketing message. Jack, what are the key points here?
Well, the key point is there are a lot of questions you can ask the consumers. And based on their answer, they very well may be a fixed index annuity buyer. And this slide and the next slide are just some of the points.
Yeah, and I'll pose that polling question, everybody, too, about low interest rates, and if other advisors are seeing the same thing that we're seeing from when we're talking to a lot of customers is, bonds and CDs just aren't paying enough, and customers are concerned about that. So I think we're starting to get responses here, but everybody, 90% of you are saying that you're seeing the same thing, which is customers worried about it. Where are they going to put? Where's their safe money bucket? And that's a real concern, is their retirement plans are getting blown up, and a lot of times they're at the age where they're just not in a position, maybe they're already retired, to go back to work or find other alternative sources for their income. So Jack, would you have a final thought about indexed annuities today in this uncertain times, and how people should be thinking about where these products fit? I know I was just reading an article yesterday in a trade publication that's historically been pretty critical about index products, and so no surprise, it said, today's low interest rate environment would be the worst time to lock into, guaranteed solutions. But what's your overall point to make today about index products?
Well, I'll go back to my initial parable. In the last 3 bull markets, they were followed by 3 horrible bear markets. We had the flood, and the flood washed away half of what you owned. Fixed index annuities protect you from the brown channel and losing your money.
Well, very well put. And we're a big believer in these products. They've been around over 20 years. They've proven their returns. Jack, I know you've done a ton of research on these over the years, and we're happy to get that information out to other people if you're interested. So with that, I'll be wrapping things up here. But thank you, Dr. Marrion, for your valuable insights into where index annuities from the client's perspective fit in these uncertain times. Thanks again to North American Company for their generous sponsorship. And I'm certain that all of our attendees today picked up some nuggets that they will be able to take back implement into their businesses right away to help you grow your sales and reach your fullest potential. I'd encourage everyone to call your marketer here at IAMS today, if you can. 800-255-5055 is the number. Ask about three of the three items that we'll be offering to all the attendees on this Elevate Your Sales EQ program. Those three items are Dr. Marrion's white paper, number one. Number two, the IAMS proprietary point of sale piece on the cycle of client emotions, which is an excellent piece that can resonate with every client in those conversations, no matter what kind of financial product you're talking about. And then third is a customized free marketing analysis report on your business to see if your advertising is aligned with the target demographic to help ensure that the right marketing message is connecting with your target customer. Be on the lookout for next month's webinar program in the Elevate Your Sales EQ series. This was part one, and that will be continued with Dr. Marrion through the course of the year. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your partnership.